Welcome to the Spiritual Sovereign Sister podcast with Elizabeth, Akashic Records practitioner, teacher, and founder of Divine Feminine Reiki. Today, we're diving into a spiritual topic that carries a lot of confusion, myth, and misunderstanding. We're exploring soul contracts, including karmic connections, soulmates, and twin flames. And I often see women unintentionally give their power away to some of these myths we are going to talk about today. And my hope is that with a clear understanding of this topic, you will be able to make more empowering choices. Spirituality is the doorway. Sovereignty is the embodiment. So before we get started today, I want to take care of some housekeeping. First and foremost, I want to mention that we all have soul contracts with others, and we can explore the nature of what is in them in Akashic readings. Now, right now, my readings are currently on a wait list. But if you are feeling the call to deepen your spiritual journey by learning to work directly in your records, I am offering a Level 1 Akashic Reading and Clearing 6-week online class starting May the 24th. And I'll put a link in the show notes below for those two opportunities to get either on the wait list or to join the training class. And one quick side note before we narrow our focus, we have soul contracts with animals, places, homes, and yes, even entities. But today I'm going to talk about soul contracts from the viewpoint between two people. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's dive into today's topic. Let's begin with a working definition of what soul contracts are from the Akashic perspective. Soul contracts are agreements between the higher self of two souls prior to incarnating together. It's based on what each soul wants to learn and how they can help each other to do that. The soul likes to explore and see things from different perspectives. And as I have seen in many readings and looking into my own past lives, two souls may choose in one life to be happy and work together, even in karmic connections. And then in another life, one of those souls may choose to play the role of more of the challenger. And then in another life, the other person will be the one to play that role. And it can go back and forth like that until the contract is complete. The point when looking at soul contracts, especially when people have experienced trauma with others, is to come to readings knowing that we will be looking at the soul contract and connection from a bigger picture perspective. And the reasoning for soul contracts is for the evolution of two souls. Let's talk a little bit about the purpose of soul contracts. The primary reason that souls enter contracts is growth, more specifically for karmic lessons. Now, soul contracts are not random connections. They are structured around experiences the soul wishes to move through, understand, and integrate. And I see a very common pattern in readings, especially around relationships. Someone may feel unloved, unseen, or misunderstood in a partnership. And they assume that the issue is the other person, and so they leave. And then the next relationship feels wonderful at first, yet eventually the same emotional themes start to return. So why does this happen? From an Akashic perspective, because the lesson was never truly about the other individual, it was about the internal wound that needed to be addressed. And until that inner dynamic is brought into awareness and healed, the soul will continue encountering similar situations, sometimes through different people. So the lesson has another opportunity to be resolved. And from the Akashic perspective, the identity of the person is often secondary. It's not about who the other person is. It's the lesson that is the focal point. Because lessons contain the healing. That's what carries the shifts and the awakenings and the evolution that we seek. Now, of course, not all contracts are rooted in difficulty. Some are formed for creation or partnerships or some kind of shared purpose. such as raising children or building something meaningful or contributing to others. Now, this leads into a deeper question. Why do relationships play such a powerful role in the soul evolution? And there are many reasons, but I want to focus on two. The first is that we all have blind spots. We carry aspects of ourselves that remain unseen. And very often it is challenging or uncomfortable experiences that bring those hidden layers into awareness. Not because suffering is required, but because discomfort reveals what comfort allows us to ignore. These moments stir emotions and reactions and beliefs that were already present beneath the surface. And this is what we call suppressed emotions or shadow aspects. The second is karma. Now, karma is not reward or punishment. It is the energetic momentum created by intention. So, by our thoughts, choices, and actions, it's cause and effect. What shapes karma is not merely what we do, but the intention from which we act. Let me offer a simplified illustration from my own records. In a past life, I experienced the loss of a husband, and the grief was so profound that it influenced my choices, many of which were made from fear from that point on, and it negatively affected my other relationships later on. That unresolved emotional imprint didn't just vanish. It carried forward as an energetic memory for me. And even in this life, I encountered that same soul again, yet the pattern unfolded differently. I made different choices. Rather than responding from fear, I made new empowering choices. And the lesson then shifted from loss to wholeness, to realizing that connection and emotional completeness cannot be taken from me. That already lives abundantly within. And that inner shift is what allowed the karmic pattern to resolve. So let me touch on free will within soul contracts. Free will is one of the most misunderstood aspects of soul contracts. Having a soul contract with someone does not mean that you are obligated to remain in a dynamic or a partnership that feels harmful, misaligned, or disempowering. Soul contracts define themes of growth and experience, but how those themes unfold is always influenced by choice, awareness, and personal sovereignty. Karma itself is a neutral thing. It's not a reward or punishment, as we said before, but simply cause and effect shaped by the intention and consciousness of where you are at the time. At any point in our lives, we retain the ability to choose how we engage and how we respond, and whether we continue participating in certain patterns. Now, there are times when we may sense a strong energetic connection with someone and recognize the nature of the lesson that's involved, yet consciously we can decide not to engage in that specific dynamic or even in the relationship at all. But you have to understand, the lesson itself does not disappear just because you say no to it. Similar themes or challenges often resurface through other people or circumstances. And this is an important distinction. You may decline a particular interaction, but the underlying soul lesson still seeks resolution. I feel like Ram Dass captured this idea beautifully in his book, Be Here Now, when he described trying to avoid certain lessons for himself, only to be reminded by his spirit guide, you signed up for the earthly incarnation. How about you take the curriculum? Free will does not remove growth from our path. It gives us agency in how we move through it. This leads to something I want to make very clear. No soul contract ever requires you to remain in relationships that are abusive or harmful. Growth does not demand self-abandonment, but free will is the mechanism through which sovereignty is expressed. One of the most common misunderstandings I see involves the idea of revoking contracts or avoiding certain dynamics. Sometimes people believe that if we can revoke a contract or simply refuse to engage with a particular connection, that the karmic lesson itself disappears and that the contract itself is gone as well. But from an Akashic perspective, the lesson does not dissolve through avoidance. What often happens instead is a delay. You absolutely have the free will to decline learning through a specific person or relationship. However, the underlying lesson is still going to seek that resolution. You can't avoid it. You can't get around it. It's going to show up in a different way. So similar themes and emotions or challenges tend to resurface through other people and circumstances, sometimes repeatedly, until the pattern is brought into awareness and integrated. And this is not punishment, but it's simply the nature of growth. Avoidance may postpone discomfort in the short term, but it frequently prolongs the lesson itself. The soul is not seeking suffering, it's seeking completion and clarity and evolution. Let's discuss the difference in the decision-making process at the soul level versus the human level. And I want to mention this because we make these contracts before incarnating in places of unconditional love. And the difference is at a soul level, we recognize the good that is contained in every soul. We're not connected and we're not living in the densities of earth. We are in those higher dimensions whenever we make these contracts. We're able to see these lessons from that bigger picture perspective and all the good that it's going to provide for us. Then when we get here on earth and we're in the middle of it, it can feel really difficult. And we feel like we've made a mistake, or we ask ourselves, what did I sign up for? But oftentimes we will want to exit out of the contract prematurely because it's incredibly hard. And those feelings and desires are valid and important to sit with and work through. But Akashic readings can help, especially for those that have worked through a lot of those inner issues already and are ready to look at the bigger picture perspective. And this was especially true when I was healing from sexual trauma and how I viewed the person that did that to me by looking at my soul contract with them. And it really helped me to step out of victimization or lay down the energy of fear and take with me the life-changing lessons that I'm forever grateful for. Let's get into the types of soul contracts. This next part is usually what people are most curious about in readings. What is the nature of the soul contract? Is a really popular question that I get. I want to dismantle the limiting beliefs around the different types of soul contracts and define what they truly mean. Soul contracts can be categorized into 3 different types, and those 3 types can be described as either uplifting or diminishing. The first type of soul connection that we can have is with a twin flame. This is considered an uplifting type of connection. Let me first explain to you what a twin flame connection is. This is where 2 individual fractals, or 2 souls, have the same higher self. And one fractal is a female and the other incarnates as a male. I get a lot of women who feel like they have met a twin flame, and there's lots of misconceptions about what they mean and their purpose. And I've seen people make really radical decisions based on myth. The purpose of what a twin flame connection is for spiritual awakening. And oftentimes people think it's to have this ultimate love experience. And that's not always true. So I want you to pay attention to how many ifs exist in what I'm getting ready to say. Okay? So prior to incarnation, if the higher self determines that a twin flame connection is necessary for growth, the meeting point is carefully planned. It's not something that you can block or delay or miss. You can't mess this up. It's very important. Here's this critical distinction. Since the primary function is spiritual awakening for either one or both individuals, once that happens, the contract is complete. Now, if A romantic experience is also part of the plan. That too will unfold naturally, even if it's brief. And what often happens is that one person, typically the female, immediately recognizes that this is a twin flame connection. So they rush into the relationship and it scares the male off. Then the relationship enters in what people label a twin flame separation or a no contact phase. Then there's this internal conflict, especially for the female, that often arises, and it usually sounds like this. She's saying, I want marriage and I want children and I want a partnership, but I feel like I have to wait for him to get his life together and come back. This is such an important moment to talk about. Even if there was deep love and chemistry, the deeper purpose is conscious expansion, not dependency. Your life is never meant to be placed on hold for another soul's timing. Twin flame connections do not erase your individuality, your desires, or your own personal missions. You are still an autonomous soul with your own purpose and your own experiences apart from your counterpart. So please don't allow this limiting belief to rob you of your life experiences and stagnate yourself by waiting on a connection that may or may not return, because you have soul contracts with others also that are waiting for you. Now we're going to cover karmic connections. A karmic connection is a type of relationship that is considered diminishing. While there can be some karmic lessons between twin flames and soulmates, in these connections, this is where we see a lot of hardships and power struggles and trauma. However, I want to note here that you can also have really beautiful relationships with karmic partners. This isn't about just not getting along or disliking someone, but there will be this undercurrent of disempowerment between the two souls. But this is where we learn so much. And while these connections are often difficult, and this isn't to excuse abusive behavior, but from a soul perspective, it's a very loving thing for another soul to do, to be involved in our karmic lessons and help us neutralize our karma, which is the reason that we as souls choose to engage in karmic connections. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you want to learn to truly know your worth and your value. Then what better way to learn that than having people around you who make you feel worthless? Now, I'm sure that for those of you listening, that you probably can instantly determine who your karmic connections are or who they were in your life. But as we talk about sovereignty on this podcast, as you remember from episode 1, it's about taking radical responsibility for ourselves. These karmic connections can help us if we take the time to sit with them and discover what these lessons are, to step out of that victim consciousness. Our last type of soul contract connection is soulmates. So a soulmate connection is another type of uplifting soul contract. This is unlike twin flame connections, as you do not share the same higher self. This isn't always about romantic interactions either. This could be a special grandparent that you resonate to, or one of your children that you feel a slightly deeper connection to. It could also be a teacher that was very influential to you in your life and nurtures your talents. We can have lots of soulmates, but soulmate connections are created between souls for a common shared goal. And it could be to get married and have children, or create something helpful to humanity, or work together to help others. According to the Akashic Records, we tend to reincarnate with the same souls over and over again because we come to know them. I like to think of soulmates as your spiritual besties. Now, one thing in retrospect to this is a lot of women get surprised in Akashic readings as to who their soulmate contracts are. And I want to explain this for just a moment so that you can see just how souls can choose to interact. Let's say that you have a karmic connection with a soul and you both have spent many lifetimes going through difficult situations. And then there is a point before your next incarnation when you and your karmic connection are discussing your next lifetime together. And your karmic partner says, hey, I'm deciding not to reincarnate on Earth for the next, 300 years. I want to explore other planets and their schools. But you want to reincarnate on Earth, but you still are needing to clear the karma that you have with that karmic connection. It's not uncommon for a soulmate to step in and say, I will play a difficult role for you to help you neutralize this karma while your karmic connection is somewhere else. I've seen this with women asking about horrible cheating ex-husbands, and they are so shocked and slightly disappointed that those are actually some soulmate connections. But that's what they're doing, what I just described. That doesn't mean that they need to go back to that relationship, but this is the nature of that soul contract. And I'd love to do another episode on past lives and how souls can interact with each other and the concept of past life bleed over. And if that's something that interests you, send me an email or leave a comment below. So let's talk about signs that you have a soul contract with someone. An Akashic record reading is the best way to explore the nature of the soul contracts. I do want to offer some signs that you might have one with someone else. We all have soul contracts with the major people in our life. But as to what kind of connection, that might be a little bit more confusing. So the first sign is when you feel into this connection, is it an uplifting one or a diminishing one? Now, for some of you, it's going to be a lot more obvious than others. And others, you're going to have to really look at the overall interactions with this person. Have there been some undercurrents of control or trying to diminish your own power or totally understanding your worth and self-love? The second is a deep and instant knowing. Whenever you meet them for the first time, and while you may not know them in this life, you can feel that you have known them before, or it just feels like you've known them forever. The third sign is time doesn't function the same way when you are with them. And this is partly because there's something about them that makes you feel at ease. And so time just seems to fly by when you're with them, like you picked up right where you left off. And another sign people often report is this really strong pull or magnetism. Let's say that you meet someone and become romantically involved with them, and the pull is so strong that you simply cannot help but leave everything behind in order to be with them. And the ego often interprets this as we're meant to be together or they are the one, when in actuality, it's the soul desiring to engage in the contract that you have together. Thank you for listening to the Spiritual Sovereign Sister podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and it brought you some clarity and understanding. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It helps me out and I really appreciate my listeners. Also, feel free to ask me questions about spiritual topics. I may do a podcast episode on them. My contact info will be in the show notes also. See you in the next episode.